Welcome back to our channel where we share updates and untold stories about Catherine, Princess of Wales and her royal family. Today we bring you some significant news. Camilla in tears after royal council. Named Princess Catherine as Queen. Royal order upended. Catherine, Princess of Wales, named future monarch by Global Council. Queen Camilla abruptly departs summit in protest. The Global Royal Council has officially appointed Catherine, Princess of Wales, as the next queen, causing significant upheaval within the British monarchy and its international relations. The extraordinary decision, based on a previously concealed edict from the late Queen Elizabeth II, was announced at a confidential high-stakes session in Geneva. The statement resulted in a spectacular public show of dissent when Queen Camilla, obviously enraged, exited the room abruptly, leaving the world's most prominent royal representatives in astonished silence. The occurrence, poised to be recognized as a significant turning point in contemporary royal history, has effectively altered the line of succession in reality, if not yet in legislation, and has sparked a constitutional and personal crisis that jeopardizes the House of Windsor. A conference enveloped with confidentiality and strain. Geneva, a city emblematic of discreet diplomacy and concealed truths, was the selected location for an unprecedented meeting. The Global Royal Council, an institution deeply rooted in history and shrouded in secrecy, had assembled in its entirety. This is the pinnacle of royal diplomacy, an alliance of sovereign officials from the Commonwealth nations and other allied kingdoms united not alone by political commitment, but by the enduring weight of centuries-old connections. Their meetings are often elaborate but unremarkable events meticulously designed to exhibit stability and continuity. However, this occasion was distinct. Amidst the refined pleasantries and formal salutations, an undercurrent of anxiety was palpable enough to penetrate the marble corridors of the Palais des Nations. In the days before the assembly, murmurs had escalated into a cacophony inside diplomatic circles. Reports disseminated via secret channels indicated that the council's agenda was not only ceremonial. Discussions arose on a generational realignment, an unnerving term that remained undefined by anybody. Some conjectured on modifications in royal responsibilities across the Commonwealth. Others contemplated a novel vision for the monarchy's governance. A tiny but persistent minority asserted that the gathering would establish a successor in a manner capable of superseding even the announcements of Buckingham Palace. Catherine, Princess of Wales, arrived in Geneva with her characteristic poise. Since entering the royal limelight, she has established an impact that extends far beyond the borders of the United Kingdom. Presidents, prime ministers, and foreign dignitaries see her as both accessible and authoritative, a unique equilibrium indicative of a leadership that is not yet formally hers, but definitely evident. She comported herself not as a challenger for authority, but as an individual already entrusted with it. That more than anything disturbed many who see her as a subtle menace to the existing order. Queen Camilla came with the confident demeanor of a lady who has persevered for her position and maintained it despite challenges that may have overwhelmed others. She has faced public scrutiny, incessant comparisons to a predecessor whose legacy looms, and the challenge of assuming a post many deemed unsuitable for her. This council meeting was yet another chance for her to affirm her legitimate status and demonstrate her role as the monarchy's steadfast anchor during a tumultuous period. The first indication that this assembly might deviate from the anticipated narrative emerged promptly. As the council members entered the Grand Chamber, their seating arrangement was dictated not just by alphabetical order or nationality, but by precedence and old custom that conveys significant meaning silently. Catherine occupied the esteemed position at the head of the right-hand table, designated for those considered vital to the institution's future by the council. Camilla, although remaining in the first row, was positioned to the left, a symbolic relegation in a setting where symbols have significant meaning. It was modest enough to be justified as a formality, but sufficiently purposeful to convey a distinct message. From that point, the ambiance seemed to constrict. The revelation of a queen's ultimate directive. Courtesies were exchanged, hands were shaken, and rehearsed comments were spoken with diplomatic finesse. However, underlying everything was a muted rhythm of expectation. The seasoned veterans of council politics discerned the cadence. It was the precursor to an epiphany, the silence before the descent of an imperceptible hammer. Subsequently, when the whispers of courteous dialogue diminished, a solitary item captivated everyone's attention. An antiquated cream-hued envelope emblazoned with the distinctive royal cipher of Queen Elizabeth II was presented to the room by a white-gloved maid. The chair of the council, a venerable elder statesman from a prominent Commonwealth kingdom, addressed the problem, succinctly characterizing it as one of historical significance that necessitates prompt attention. The true tempest was still accumulating, and the first thunderclap occurred when an old edict long entombed in the royal archives was suddenly resurrected. A paper sealed with Queen Elizabeth II's personal crest, locked away for decades, emerged from a velvet case, and its contents would upend the royal order. Dr. Alistair Finch, the chief archivist of the Global Royal Council, advanced his hands calm, and his words imbued with historical significance. A paper was before him, one that many in the room had only heard murmured about in esoteric royal circles, a contingency instruction written during the last years of Queen Elizabeth's reign, kept confidential until the time considered most pivotal. The time seems to have come. The hush was complete as he shattered the wax seal, the subtle fracture, like the rupture of a chain that had confined the monarchy's most profound contingency. The archivist started reading his diction intentional and calculated each word laden with significance. The decree articulated the late Queen's personal vision for preserving the stability and continuity of the crown amidst any crisis that could undermine the monarchy's public trust or international reputation. It was not a conventional procedural document. This was personal, created with the painstaking attention of a sovereign who had endured more adversities than any queen before her. It pertained not to the present she governed, but to the future she could just foresee. As he delved further into the text, the council members inclined their bodies forward. This outline presents a succession plan intended to avert disorder during a generational rupture, a situation in which the conventional line of inheritance may not benefit the institution's overall welfare. Subsequently, the clause emerged, eliciting a profound tsunami across the room. Catherine, Princess of Wales, has been designated as monarch regent in the event of a crisis of unity or legitimacy within the monarchy. Not Camilla, no one else. Catherine. Authored by Elizabeth herself. Gasps emanated from the delegates, the sound undulating like a breeze across water. Even among the most experienced royals in attendance, few could conceal their shock. This was a definite recommendation. It was a definitive instruction, a deliberate protection, entrusted to a lady whom Elizabeth clearly saw as the epitome of the monarchy's destiny. The revelation included both the Queen's power and her discernible judgment of character. Camilla remained still. However, others around saw it the clenching of her jaw and the subtle constriction of her eyes. It was the first indication of a more incisive element behind her refined facade. This transcended mere procedure or precedent. This pertained to identity authority and the understanding that in the most pivotal situation, the late Queen had selected an alternative leader. The sting was more acute due to its public revelation in this forum of international royal figures. For Catherine, the event was not one to publicly commemorate. She listened impassively, her eyes unwavering, her hands positioned serenely before her. However, despite her calm exterior, she must have sensed the magnitude of what had just been announced. In one interpretation, the council and indeed the whole world saw that her name had been inscribed in history not only as a wife to a future king, but also as the monarchy's designated protector. The edict finished, the archivist's voice diminished into a hush that seemed denser than the surrounding walls. Although the ink on the parchment may have faded decades before, for Camilla the wound it inflicted remained raw and profoundly painful. A monarch's wrath. Contained observers in the room reported sensing an intangible stress emanating from Queen Camilla as she clutched the arms of her chair. Her fingers were pallid, every muscle taut with unexpressed fury. Her stillness conveyed a significance more profound than any verbal scream could achieve. Her posture was erect, her demeanor well-controlled, but an intensity in her tranquility compelled even experienced diplomats to take notice. The stillness emanated not from tranquility, but from restraint, an effort to suppress an impending surge. For Camilla, such situations were familiar. Her ascent into the royal family had been a protracted struggle for legitimacy. She had withstood the murmurs, the headlines, and the incessant parallels to Diana, a specter that persisted in haunting the corridors of Buckingham Palace. Each public appearance became an examination, and every formal engagement served as a chance for detractors to scrutinize her presence and compare her to an irreplaceable memory. She had mastered the art of combat without unsheathing her blade and the ability to persevere without revealing her injuries. However, inside this chamber, the conflict had assumed a novel manifestation. The decree's words hung in the air, and the sense of betrayal was unmistakable. This was not only a disagreement over etiquette. The late Queen explicitly said in writing from decades before that during a crisis, Camilla was not to serve as the monarchy's anchor. Catherine had been bestowed with that duty, that trust, and that symbolic crown. Her thoughts reverted to previous instances of subdued humiliation, the chilly receptions in select Commonwealth countries, the deliberate omissions of her name in significant public speeches, and the infrequent yet piercing occasions when senior royals, particularly Princess Anne, had expressed their preference for Catherine in sensitive diplomatic matters. She endured such affronts by convincing herself they were transient. However, this was irrevocable. Catherine sat across the table, exuding the same tranquil demeanor that had endeared her to a worldwide audience. She smiled while listening to the proceedings, expressing thanks via nods to the delegates who complimented her. There was no ostentation, no explicit display of victory. That maybe was even more exasperating. In the dimness of the room, Camilla's attendants were occupied. Subtly, signals started transmitting from their gadgets, using coded language, that implored her to maintain composure and conceal her reaction. They understood the danger of any discernible fissure. Camilla's public persona was shaped by perseverance. To falter now would be to provide her detractors with the very moment they had anticipated. She maintained an unwavering gaze, regulated her breathing, and concealed her rage behind an impenetrable facade. However, underneath that facade, the computations had already started. This was not a conflict to be conducted publicly. This would be addressed in hallways via phone conversations and in carefully chosen words that may alter relationships and destabilize Catherine's newly acquired status. Camilla was well acquainted with political conflict and would not let herself be excluded from the monarchy's destiny without resistance. The vote that determined a new monarchical fate. The room, already laden with anxiety, now throbbed with the quiet that precedes a big choice. The council chair said that according to the late Queen's order, a formal vote will be conducted to ratify the council's support for Catherine as the appointed future queen. This was not a customary endorsement. This constituted the real-time revision of history. The procedure was formal, governed by archaic regulations and stringent etiquette. No expressions of opposition, no explicit campaigning, merely a somber ceremony in which each delegate was summoned to declare their position. As the voting began, the prevailing trend became evident. The first hands were raised promptly, their justifications resonating from previous confidential discussions, the need for global cohesion, and the aspiration for a sovereign capable of reconciling tradition with contemporary governance. Catherine had transformed into the epitome of her ideal. Camilla remained still, her gaze directed forward. However, the subtle constriction of her lips revealed the impact of each lifted hand. The previously whispered remarks in secluded passageways are now being codified into a consensus. This was not only the desire of a few groups of ambitious individuals, it was the predominant resolution of the monarchy's most powerful institution. For Catherine, the situation required supreme composure. She exhibited no signs of victory, nor did she cast a look of contentment at her opponent. Instead, she exemplified respect with a subtle gesture of recognition to each vote cast in her favor. The council did not overlook that punishment. In an environment where restraint often conveys more than words, Catherine's composure was seen as indicative of a leader who comprehended the significance of the crown prior to donning it. By the time the last names were announced, the outcome was unequivocal. Hand after hand ascended in her advantage. Among the many attendees, just one maintained opposition, a steadfast supporter of Camilla, whose singular dissent could not alter the result. The remainder articulated their views with almost universal precision. Subsequently, with a voice that pierced the profound hush, the council chair issued the proclamation that would provoke a royal upheaval. The statement was straightforward, yet its effect was profound. By the authority of the Global Royal Council, Princess Catherine shall take the position of future monarch. They lingered in the atmosphere, poised like the resonance of an immense bell that could never be ignored. The wording was intentional, measured in tone but laden with the undeniable gravity of history. For a moment there was a tense, breathless silence. Subsequently, the chamber exploded. Applause emanated from the majority of attendees, their approbation evident, although restrained. Catherine rose gradually, as if the significance of the event necessitated a measured recognition. She stood upright, her hands poised in front of her, and offered a deliberate nod to the council before speaking. Her speech conveyed the lucidity of one who comprehended both the luxury and the responsibility imposed upon her. She expressed gratitude to the delegates for their confidence, emphasized unity and duty, and vowed to protect the monarchy for future generations. The remarks were kind, although an unmistakable subtext prevailed. She was prepared. The global walkout Camilla was silently unraveling across the table. Initially, it was nuanced, a constriction of the lips, a sudden inhalation, and a little movement of the head. However, it subsequently intensified. Those within earshot caught the subtle whisper of words, spoken softly, terse, and imbued with incredulity. The tension between the two ladies culminated in a singular instant of eye contact. Catherine's stare was unwavering and calm, presenting neither an invitation for conflict nor a signal of withdrawal. Camilla's eyes, however, blazed with a combination of injured pride and a more intense determination, the kind of resolution forged in the crucible of treachery. Subsequently, the sound that disrupted the room's cadence emerged, the scream of a chair's legs on the glossy floor. Camilla rose swiftly, her motion sufficiently startling to attract every glance. She did not seek authorization to go. She did not conceal her objective. Silently, she pivoted her heels, hitting the marble floor with the force of gunfire. The whole chamber became quiet as the Queen exited the council. For a little while, no one stirred. The reverberation of her footsteps bounced off the lofty ceilings, a noise that seemed more pronounced than the proclamation that had just been spoken. It was a breach, a disruption of procedure in an environment where even respiration seems choreographed. Gasps resonated throughout the attendees, followed by an uncomfortable, oppressive quiet. Catherine sat composed, her demeanor tranquil, her stance unwavering. However, for those intimately acquainted with her, there was a glimmer in her eyes, a realization that the council's decision transcended conventional politics. It was intimate. Within that intimate zone, a tempest had just erupted. Behind her, aides and staff hurriedly exchanged nervous looks before racing to keep pace. One had a phone to his ear, speaking hurriedly into it. Another discreetly exited by a side entrance, perhaps, to notify the king before the news reached him indirectly. The event was captured subtly but undeniably by cameras strategically placed around the hall. Although the council would never disseminate the official recording, other perspectives, mediums, and avenues existed through which the picture might circulate. And it would traverse. The conflict shifts to covert operations. As the plaudits for Catherine diminished in the council chamber, a very different meeting was occurring in a private room above. Behind a door monitored by two staffers who deflected inquisitive gazes, Camilla was encircled by her most trusted advisors, the atmosphere inside the room saturated with indignation and incredulity. The refined control had vanished. Voices were elevated and accusations were exchanged. She inquired how such a choice could have been permitted to occur under their supervision. Her aides, some on the defensive, and others attempting to deflect responsibility, provided justifications about political momentum and Catherine's strategically developed ties. However, Camilla's attention had shifted away from elucidations. It was an act of retribution. In a subdued but incisive tone, she pledged that this would not be tolerated. Telephones were introduced rapidly. Communications were initiated with established allies in Parliament. Subtle communications were sent to associates in certain Commonwealth capitals, gauging the potential for disagreement. The objective was not to overturn the Council's vote instantaneously, an endeavor almost impossible, but to instill doubt, implying that the decision was hasty and compromised the King's authority. Beyond the suite, the first strands of a counter-narrative were already being woven. Sympathetic newspapers started to get meticulously phrased leaks portraying the council's action as a reckless political gamble. Concurrently, Catherine remained industrious. In an adjoining smaller and quieter chamber, she convened secretly with supporting delegates. No voices were raised here, simply deliberate discussions on the future trajectory. Her attitude was not adversarial, rather it was tactical. Upon her departure from the room, she had obtained verbal assurances from many influential individuals to support the decision irrespective of whatever disturbances Camilla could provoke. The King's tormented decision. For King Charles, the choice was very distressing, caught between his wife's dignity and the compelling demands of the international royal coalition. He received the news via a confidential memo during a diplomatic meeting. Charles was silent for an extended while. He devoted decades to protecting Camilla. Witnessing her exit from the council chamber in open disobedience was already distressing. Understanding the reason for her departure exacerbated the anguish significantly. Nevertheless, he could not disregard the other reality. Catherine's name has become emblematic of stability and diplomacy. She represented the progress of the monarchy in the eyes of the world. Her endorsement was not only an advantage, it was a crucial need. In the following hours, he withdrew into confidential conversations. Some implored him to resist to uphold the dignity of his queen. However, more experienced individuals advised prudence. Accept the decision, one advisor said unequivocally. The council has represented the Commonwealth. This transcends pride. It pertains to survival. The king deliberated about the decision throughout the night. He could protect Camilla and perhaps alienate a public increasingly favoring Catherine, or he could support the council's decision and risk further straining his marriage. By daylight, he was aware of the path he needed to pursue. A delicate ceasefire amidst global tensions. Before the global media, King Charles accomplished the unexpected. He bestowed his blessing on Catherine's new job while grasping Camilla's hand. The atmosphere was formal, laden with expectation. In his speech, he commended Camilla, recognizing her years of steadfast service. His remarks were sufficiently warm to protect her from public disgrace, but judiciously crafted to avoid contradicting the council's decision. Subsequently, the shift occurred. He firmly supported Catherine's designation as future monarch, presenting it as a choice taken in unity for the benefit of the crown and the Commonwealth. Catherine's reply was both calm and kind. She stood inclined, her head slightly toward the king, and expressed gratitude to both him and the council for the confidence bestowed upon her. She articulated her dedication to duty, accountability, and the preservation of the monarchy's principles. Camilla positioned herself next to Charles, her stance flawless, and her expression subdued. Before the cameras, she epitomized the elegant queen. However, to those intimately acquainted with her, the reality was there in her eyes, the lingering trace of a pain that no display of solidarity could obliterate. The worldwide response was instantaneous. Headlines praised Catherine's humility and the king's skillful management of a situation that might have divided the royal family. Approval ratings surged. However, behind the accolades, insiders murmured that the seeming peace was tenuous, a ceasefire forged out of necessity, rather than genuine reconciliation. Upon the conclusion of the rituals, the king retreated, allowing Catherine and Camilla to go in unison. Cameras captured them strolling side by side, their demeanors composed, but their eyes remained focused forward, never glancing at one another. No words were spoken, no subtle grins shared. Just the silent, graceful dance of two ladies united by obligation, but separated by the circumstances that led them here. The council in Geneva has been completed, although the struggle for the monarchy's essence has only begun. Within the royal family, the conclusion of one chapter does not signify the end of the narrative. This is only the calm before the subsequent event. Thank you for watching the video. Please let us know your thoughts and goodbye for now.